Okay, today is Wednesday, October 16th. It's about 6:10 in the evening. I'm calling this meeting of the Brattleboro Planning Commission to order. First thing to do is approve the minutes of our September 9th meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Another second. Any discussion?
They looked pretty good again, very thorough.
Very thorough, and we might add without a good recording, unfortunately. But
Oh,
looks like it didn't matter.
it's our girl Julia. She does a great job, huh?
Indeed.
She just guesses.
She
I think
probably
she
looked
can
at the
channel you.
BCTV, but anyway, so all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Anybody opposed? That passes 4-0. There's no public comment. I skipped announcements. Sorry. Announcements.
I have an invitation from planning commissioners and conservation commissions to help create a coordinated plan for keeping forests and wildlife habitat intact.
Huh.
It's going to be a focus group on November 12th at the Compass School in Westminster. We're going to discuss existing local and regional strategies, brainstorm new ones, and hand out free copies of a publication, Community Strategies for Vermont Forests and Wildlife, a guide to local action. It's VNRC, Vermont Natural Resources Council, and it looks like the Regional Planning Commission are sponsoring it. So I can pass
What
it.
time?
It is 6 to 8:30.
Free? Must be, huh?
Yep.
Any other announcements? Okay, so as I said, there
Sterling College.
are no members of the public here tonight, so we'll skip over public comment. Subdivision regulations. Do you guys want to start by talking about the split, or go to the articles, or what?
Oh, I see 3 different places.
We can.
Oh.
Well, we can
Understand.
go here.
Oh,
Or
I get it. Okay.
kind of the split comes at the end. It doesn't
Okay.
kind of go in the order. Rod and I had a meeting. At the last meeting, there were a lot of questions about roads and driveways and private roads
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. So Rod and I met with some of the staff from the Public Works Department and had a chance to kind of go over what we had written, where they were on standards and that kind of thing. What they seem to be most focused and emphatic on is that they're focused on if the town's going to take over the road. And if the town's going to take over a road, they want it paved. They don't care if it connects to a gravel road, but they want it paved. They want it to have good road bed construction, and they felt that, for the most part, the standards that we have now in the appendix of our existing subdivision regulations are good enough. There's been a couple of tweaks that Gary King provided. And they would like a 18-foot traveled way, so 2 9-foot lanes. They don't want anything smaller. They're not interested in taking over a 7-foot, 2 7-foot travel lanes. So I think they were that seems to be where they want it to be. They don't necessarily, they think a 50-foot right of way is good for private roads, but they don't care if a private road is gravel. They want it to have appropriate ditching so that it doesn't ruin their roads, but they're not. Would you agree they're not as concerned about?
No.
About those. They didn't have any issues with the kind of the design standards that we had about the length of dead-end roads. They did like the Y turnaround.
Right.
So they liked the way you've written it.
Pretty much. And then they didn't. I think the only sort of 2 things for us to encounter was that they were really clear that their minimum size, they use large trucks for plowing, and that even if you angle a blade, that the narrowest width they can really address is 12 feet, I think, or even a little more. So they were really concerned that the minimum road width be adequate, so that the plow could be traveling in one direction and then a car could go in the other if needed. and that makes for a fairly wide road, is what I'd say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did they say anything about utilities? Like connecting to utilities? If you are going to connect, do they have to run? Does that work? Do they run under the road or?
It usually runs within
yeah.
the right of way.
Yeah, it's usually located within the right of way. More commonly now than in times past, they'll make it a requirement that if you're going to take utilities from one side of the road to the other, that instead of digging the road surface up, that you tunnel underneath, which I think has become more affordable. So there's no disturbance to the road, the blacktop on top.
So what if in the future there are 12 people at the end of a road and they decide, you know what, for X amount of dollars a piece we can tie into municipal water? Do you have to dig up the road? Is that just... Or
it's not always the case in the existing layout that the lines run along the roads, although for the most part they want that to happen. We were pretty focused on the rural and rural residential districts in this discussion, partly because we were mostly talking about new road construction along with new subdivision, and we were all operating on the assumption that we would be not contemplating an extension of the sewer or the water system. So the question of...
Because it doesn't go out there that far.
There's a very, if we were to contemplate an extension of the water and sewer system, it would be in a pretty focused kind of way that we would be doing it. And, for the most part, that was outside the scope of our discussions. So.
Yeah, we could check in with them. I
Yep.
mean, I think that if they don't have to pay, presumably if you're extending the line, you could have to rip up the road, and I think that would be an issue for Public Works.
Yeah.
does Public Works have to pay for that in the future, or do they just bill, or like if you want a water line, you pay for everything, all of the overhead, or they just negotiate that?
Right now, the developer pays for it.
If you're going to extend the line, you're going to have to pay for the whole thing from wherever the stub is, from wherever the closest point is, and so the developer would undertake that cost. And the question remains: there's plenty of capacity for treatment at the wastewater treatment plant, and there's plenty of potable water. It's not that there's limits on either of those things, but there is a limit in terms of the network, and I think the expectation would be that a developer would be paying for any extension to the network up front. That's a sizable upfront cost.
Yeah. What they really want to avoid is, a private road going in and then the homeowners coming back and saying, we want the town to take it over, or we want the town to pave it, or these kind of things. So in a sense, right now we've written it that private roads generally need to meet the same standards as a road that would be taken over by the town. I mean, that we could probably look at that a little bit, but it kind of matches up to where they're at. They want, they don't want to be in a position in the future where they have to take up a road and it's not a good road.
Yeah. I think they're pretty clear that they don't want to be involved in the cost of the upgrade, but some basic specifications need to be in place. So a 50-foot right-of-way means that you could always upgrade the road, and then if the road construction details are correct, then the road bed, even if it's just 2 9-foot travel lanes, so therefore 18 feet wide of actual road. Gary was saying that you need to allow like half that width for ditching and so forth on it, on both sides. So, but
And then 12 feet for the plow.
Right.
Is there enough room for a car to get by the plow?
Yeah, I guess you could, if there's no big obstacles like rocks or trees in the way, which is the other part of it. So you end up having a clear area that's pretty wide. You might have a narrow roadbed, but that would facilitate that. And so their concern is that whatever road standard the developer builds to, it needs to be adequate to be upgraded if necessary.
Does that also include, I mean, we don't talk about it here, but in the regulations, does the roadbed goes deep also, and there's certain requirements
Yep.
what you have to do to
Yep.
create a road that's going to withstand the frost and all that stuff, and a developer would be required to do that too. I mean,
Yes.
that's in
Yes.
these Vermont standards,
Right.
I would assume.
Right.
Actually,
Since we
that's
don't-
not so much in the design standards. We have an appendix in our subdivision regulations that have how you construct the roadbed. And so it will either remain as an appendix here, or my preference would be to pull it out and just refer to that as the public works.
Right.
Yeah.
My concern with having it live in the appendix here is if they ever want to make changes and get this weird thing, I'd rather it be a separate document that we could refer to. I don't know if Public
Right.
Works is comfortable with that. That'd
Yeah.
be my preference.
I think I think what we're trying to do is focus on the design
Yeah.
aspects, not the construction
No, I
not the
just,
construction standards, and they
for
should.
information, was
Yeah.
just imagining that that must be included somewhere.
Right.
Yeah.
And that if somebody's going to add to a road or that they have to
Yep.
do that too.
We also talked a little bit about driveways. They don't have standards right now for driveways. They have a couple of guidelines that if somebody's putting in a driveway, or if they come in for an access permit from Public Works, that they will give them as to culvert design and ditching and that kind of thing. But they don't have real standards or anything.
Right.
So we might, similarly, either refer to these documents if you're putting in a driveway, or put them in an appendix.
So it's your feeling generally that those are ready to go?
I have to do a little tweaks to it, but they're pretty much, yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
I think we're pretty close.
I have a question about sidewalks.
Okay.
I would think that in town, people should have sidewalks rather than may have sidewalks. I mean, one would be the rural areas may, but certainly the in-town areas should have sidewalks.
Actually, we can
Is that in the,
get onto that
Page 3?
in a slightly
oh, I
different
know, but
way.
is it in the in-town
General,
subdivision?
It's under the
design.
general standard.
Yeah.
No, I see that right here,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but I wondered if it was.
Because does that tie in with that conversation later on about?
It does kind of tie in.
Yeah. All right. Actually, we don't.
You're going to have a
Is this
conversation
the right
later
set?
on?
The final set?
That's the rural, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the final set. That doesn't,
Yeah.
but that's in the in-town,
Okay.
which
Right.
is, or no, in the general.
Yeah. So,
okay. Yeah,
do you want to?
it will tie in,
Yeah.
and we can, further discuss that.
So that would get added to the in-town?
Yeah, we'll talk about
Yeah, okay.
Right,
the
we'll
way
get
it's set
that.
up, and then be able to place it.
And I don't know what other people think about that.
Well, right now, sidewalks are required, aren't they?
It's not, it's written similarly to you may have it. It's not, I think that it's not it's not very clear as to where they are required.
Like I was just,
But I think if you want to have like walking, like AARP in town,
Yes.
yeah,
Right.
that's,
public safety,
Yep.
but like the development that's currently being undertaken, he's putting sidewalks, but you wouldn't necessarily need sidewalks on a road that's just a one-way in and one-way out kind of thing. I mean, I wouldn't think.
Which,
You mean Brunel?
Yeah.
Bug Mountain Road. It's a feature
Well,
of his
connectivity,
design
yeah.
to enable connectivity and to
And-
facilitate
and-
catching the bus and so forth. And so it's a pretty steep hill also. And that might be okay for sort of a mixed-use setting, but you might find, given the target population and the road, that you'd want to separate pedestrians from drivers on that hill.
Yeah, on the hill, yeah.
So and most of the road is the hill. So that
Except
was
for up at the top where the houses are.
that was a feature of his design, and I think it was regarded favorably by us and by the DRB.
Yeah.
Where is that again? I'm sorry.
Off of Black Mountain
Black
Road.
Mountain. It's been in the
Across
paper.
91, right over the bridge.
Yeah, and so we do have it as a requirement in both rural commercial, Freudian slip, and Putney Road zoning districts, that in the commercial districts, that where people redevelop sites, if there isn't a sidewalk, that they're required to construct a sidewalk. And so
It's been pretty good. There are
slowly.
some challenges.
There are
like
some
Royal
sidewalks that go
Plaza,
nowhere,
there were
but
some
but
challenges.
still, eventually, if they get connected, it would be really nice.
Right. So we've got a couple of anomalous things like Royal Plaza, which has got nice landscaping and not a sidewalk,
Yeah.
but it acts as a buffer. The
Putney
landscaping-
Road, actually,
Right.
the trees have grown up. It's actually
Yeah.
not as bad as it used to be, actually, at all.
Right.
That
And-
sidewalk. Sorry.
No, I was going to say the DRB, I think, is pretty
Right.
stringent in requiring sidewalks on Putney Road where they can be fit in.
Right.
Yeah.
And then north of the roundabout, we've added sidewalk
Yeah.
considerably in the last couple of years. So.
Yeah, and out Route 9, too, like where the
Yep.
new Cumberland Farms, they have a sidewalk, but it just kind of begins and ends there. But
Yep.
that would be eventually nice to
Join it up.
have more.
Right.
So when you put in a sidewalk, it's just, say the road already exists and you were going to subdivide your property,
Mm-hmm.
would you put in a sidewalk then? And you just do it on your road frontage?
In existing commercial districts, such as rural commercial and on Putney Road, if you were to further subdivide and you didn't have a sidewalk, it could well be a condition of the permit that you install a sidewalk. And then, you would begin and end it, on your frontage.
I think you'd find that more in a commercial area than
Yeah.
residential.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just,
residential.
if the existing network isn't there, no.
Right. And then there's the
There's
whole,
less of a case to require. I mean, commercial properties.
I think the typical lower density, single family home kind of setting, you might get a sidewalk on one side of the road and not the other. Developer would offer that, and that would probably be acceptable
Yeah,
to the DRB.
I think Carriage Hill is that way.
Yeah, I was just going to say Carriage
Just
Hill's
on one
probably-
side.
Right.
And
Well,
most-
I think originally the Brunel subdivision actually had it on both sides.
They did.
Right.
Public Works suggested
Just putting it on one.
one.
Oh, good. Yeah, I was concerned about the two. It was like a little overkill.
Can we revisit the in-town, out-of-town dichotomy when we get to the rural/not rural separation
Sure,
thing?
as long as you use the word dichotomy when you get to
Okay.
that.
I think we should use it in the actual regulations myself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else on the driveways, public and private road?
No,
Nope.
they're definitely feel more confident as to where they're at. They just need a couple tweaks and.
Mhm.
That's great.
Yeah.
Development density weighting values.
Can I ask one question about driveways? There's a slope requirement on driveways?
There's,
Off the top of my head, I mean, the 12% slope might. I don't think there is a slope requirement. I don't think there is a slope
Development
requirement.
density, oh, that's from previous sections.
I'd be in violation if there was a
yeah,
slope.
you exceed most slope requirements, okay? It's sort of like, what is it? It's somewhere just short of 90 degrees.
The way it's written, I mean, I gotta check that because it is referring that B would apply, which does have the not exceeding an average of 10%, or a maximum of 12% for a length of 200 feet. So I'm gonna check that. There is no current driveway.
Okay, I'm glad you brought it up because it, and I don't want to drag this out any longer than we need to, but in the rural and rural residential districts in particular, there's a way in which sequential development can lead to a driveway servicing 3 homes with a further driveway servicing up to another 3 homes. And so you can cumulatively have 6 houses serviced by 2 driveways, and each, if you don't have a slope requirement on the driveways for once they exceed a certain length, you can get really steep sections on both those driveways, which would make it extremely challenging for emergency service vehicles to access, not to mention the day-to-day maintenance issues like runoff and those kinds of things. So I think it's important that we have a specification that's clear about the length of or the distance that it can be of a significant grade.
Yeah.
I think that the DRB has been applying
Yeah.
the not to exceed 12% for 200 feet. I mean, they did with a subdivision I can think of.
Yeah.
I always think about that one project near Fort Dummer. And,
That's the one I'm
That's the one we're thinking.
I mean, with the runoff issues with that, we're just, even if they fix the slope, you'd still have tons of runoff issues.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of other examples that are older than that in existence now. Ironically, also in one instance where people have asked about upgrading the driveway to town road, and one of the challenges there is that it could never meet town road standards because it's too steep.
Yeah.
So maybe leaving it at the 12% max.
It's probably a pretty good idea. Okay.
Nice catch.
Yep, thank you. That's good.
Is that on the grade?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can we move on to the development density weighting values now? Or does anybody have more to say on driveways, public and private roads? Okay. Determination of development density weighting values.
Okay. Well, this is not part that you saw, that you received before the meeting, so I'll just talk through it and we'll see it when we're at the rural section. So,
Did you pass that?
yeah.
Is that under rural subdivisions?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So the last meeting, we had started looking at, the different weighting values. So we had, a factor of 1 if it was on a paved road, a factor of 2 if it was on a gravel road, a factor of 4 I think it was a private road, of 3 or 4, and then a factor of 6 if it was
Yeah, all those different charts we had.
on a class 4 road. So Rod and I spent some more time traversing Brattleboro and checking out the roads. And it,
Pointed out a few things.
yeah. We also
Basically, I'm immune to bad roads, but
we also spoke to Public Works about the conditions of roads, private roads, gravel roads. Was there anything that was kind of substandard? In terms of substandard, they picked out a couple of portions of roads of class 3 gravel roads that have drainage issues and serious constraints to fix those drainage issues. But I mean, in general, they were pretty remote, pretty small sections.
that we didn't notice the first time.
And what did Public Works think of this
Interesting.
concept?
Of the concept, they didn't really comment on the concept. I think that Gary agreed with limiting development on class 4 town roads just
Right.
because of their condition, the maintenance or the lack of maintenance responsibilities
It
by the
was-
town. So that
Our
was
goal
received
was
well.
for them, so
Yeah.
they
Right.
liked it.
Yeah,
Yes.
that was received well.
Yeah.
And they didn't really have much of a reaction to paved gravel.
Yeah, but in talking to them and then doing the field work, we became more convinced that using the road as some kind of analog for the density calculations wasn't a really good approach. That it
Because we were dialing back a lot on that
Yeah.
at the last
That's
meeting.
right.
There's a couple anomalies, and if you put it in context of the town plan, where we really want to push development more east in town, there are a couple of class 3 gravel roads that are in the rural residential. You know, East Orchard
Right.
is one that comes to mind. Actually, it's pretty close to in town. It's close
Yeah.
to some really easily accessible paved roads that get you into town like that.
right.
And it was like, well, do we really want to be penalizing this spot, or, you know, weighting it heavier because it's a class 3 gravel road? I mean, there were some anomalies like that. I mean, it does, most of the class 3 gravel roads are in the rural district. But as I said, there's just a couple anomalies here or there. So we kind of went back to the zoning map and said, well, you know, with the exception of class 4 roads, the zoning districts kind of work.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
So what you'll see in the rural subdivision that I had passed out, I apologize for not getting to you before him, but I was really working on simplifying it.
Love simplifying.
Yeah.
So rather than a weighting, okay, if you look at section 5.4, we renamed it maximum lot yield. So, well, some of us are comfortable and understand density as an expression of units per area. Really, what we were trying to do is use it to get to how many lots, so the lot yield. So we think it's easier to understand if we call it the lot yield.
And then apply incentives afterwards. I mean,
Right.
that's a great third step.
So we
Right.
still want to, you know, subtract the unbuildable area. So the first step is determining the developable area. So that's there. And then,
Which we had in the other.
yeah. So B on page 3 is the determination of the base lot yield. So this is the weighting factors. And rather having this table and weighting it, we just basically say you're going to get 1 dwelling unit per 2 acres of developable area. In the rural residential, that matches up to what we were looking at. In the rural zoning district, you'd get 1 dwelling unit per 4 acres. These are not to be confused with minimum lot sizes, but
It gets you there.
yeah. And then if it's a class 4 town highway, it would be 1 unit per 12 acres. Now, don't forget, that's just getting you the lot yield. The minimum lot size is much smaller than these numbers.
So how does B add on to what's been determined in A?
A is the first step. You're going to figure out how much
Yeah.
developable area.
And then you do the lot
And
yield.
then you do that. And then you would get a number. So if you have, you know, on this example, if you have 50 acres of developable area and you're in the rural residential zoning district, you could get 25 units on that parcel.
Okay.
Okay.
Now you can start applying the incentives.
Which are C.
Yeah.
Yep.
And at the last meeting, we had them as expressed as a percentage. You know, 5% for this or 10% for that. And you had asked me to look at, well, what does that mean? What is 5%? And I looked at it, and it's so variable. So I changed it to saying you'll get an additional residential lot if you meet any of these, and it can be cumulative. It is, I think it works well if you've got a small number of lots. Say you're doing a 4-lot subdivision, you're going to conserve, you know, 50%, you get another lot. I mean, it seems more tangible than doing as a percentage.
Right.
It's also a lot simpler. It's great.
Yep.
It's very simple.
Yeah.
So if somebody ticked all these 4 boxes, does that mean they can get an additional lot for each one of those?
Yes.
Yes.
So you
Yeah,
can get up
that's
to
what,
4
that's
lots.
the way that's the way
Well,
I
you
read
can
it.
actually get more if you do 60%.
Right.
You know, you get an additional lot for each 10% above the initial.
Oh, right, yes,
50%
that,
reserve, so.
in that requirement.
Doesn't this have a regressive effect on how significant the incentives are as your original lot gets bigger?
It does.
Say that again?
Well,
If you have 100 lots, one more lot isn't as big as if you had 4 lots.
Yes, yes. Thank
Right.
you. Got it.
Yeah, I thought we'd think about that too. We could bracket it.
I mean, I like this. You know me, I'm always complaining things should be more simple, and I realize it's kind of hypocritical, but,
That's okay.
It is true.
That's why we like that you're here.
well, yeah, give some scapegoat. But I mean, we really want this to apply to the biggest developers, don't we?
How many big developers?
We don't really have any to
No.
speak of. I mean, I would say an astoundingly big development in Brattleboro terms at full build-out in the last 30 or 40 years is 17 parcels is the most I can think of. Which is not to say we couldn't exceed that.
Well, like how many acres is the area by Hilltop there, that development?
That's like,
It's got to be
well,
what?
it's huge acreage. It's
Right.
like 80 plus.
Acres and it's,
Might be like 120 or something like that.
are we talking High Point,
Yeah.
Yeah, Summit Circle.
Summit Circle, and then
And
it's
they
like
have about 30 lots.
maybe.
I realize that's
And
not the
not
kind
Maybe a
of
little
thing that...
less. Well, I'm talking
Little
30
less.
lots with the Montessori school, with a couple of
Right.
lots that were created, they're not all buildable lots. I think
Sure.
some of them are, the open space lots. And
Right.
Right.
I
But then
realize-
you have to weigh the incentives based on all of the areas that have been excluded for the maximum lot yield. So
Well, I mean, even, I realize that developments like that are not happening a lot, or that there's not a lot of demand, but that's the kind where you want, I think, the most to encourage preservation of the unconstrained land area. But an additional one lot for 50% preserved would have less benefit to a potential developer
Yeah.
than cutting up the maximum developable area without preserving that. You know what I mean?
So where's the cutoff? I mean, we could have it two ways. If it's a subdivision of less than 10 lots, then you can get this additional lot. We could go to a percentage if it's greater than 10 lots or great. I'm trying to think where would the...
Well, let's go at it slightly differently. So right now, the minimum parcel size in rural is 3 acres, right? So say you've got let's say you've got a 40-acre parcel that you're willing to that you want to subdivide. Right now, just taking the physical reality of the 40 acres, you probably can't develop. You've got to put in roads, and you've got steep slope, and you've got issues anyway. So maybe you can only develop 30 of those 40 acres right now if you're just being practical about it. That gets you 10 lots. It seems to me, that might be the biggest subdivision we're likely to encounter kind of in a conventional way right now. If you gave them a bonus of, right now, straight off the bat, an extra lot, that's 11. That's okay. You could say something like, if the original parcel is 30 acres or less, it's one lot. If it's 30 to 90, it's 2 lots, right? Or something like that as a base. I think that the requirement that you're getting at, James, for each additional 10% above the initial 50% preserved, an additional one lot is permitted. Maybe that's what changes on bigger subdivisions, right?
When this says, I know I should probably know this, but when this says 50% of the unconstrained land area,
Oh, it should say of the 50% of the developable land area.
Yeah.
okay,
To be
that's
consistent with our term.
that's what I thought.
The developable.
Unconstrained should be developed.
I mean, because the other part about it is, I mean, I'm just trying to be the devil's advocate here. To go back to my example, if you've got your 40 acres, 10 acres of it isn't just made up, in this case, in this example, 10 acres is made up of stuff you can't build on, but it also has really serious natural resource values and wildlife, wilderness values. And by sensitively developing the remaining 30 acres, you're effectively further protecting that 10 acres that's not buildable. So in a case like this, if you're reserving or preserving another 50% of the remaining 30, that's kind of a lot,
Well, I'm thinking is you've got your 30 acres of developable area.
Yep.
And right now, sorry, how many lots can you do? 15?
On 30?
30 you can do 10.
10, sorry. So if you ask someone to preserve 50% of that, they would be left with 15 acres to develop on,
Right.
which would allow them to have 5 lots. So the additional 1 lot they got for that incentive, wouldn't be worth it, I don't think. That's right.
Wait,
Oh.
you just said,
If I'm understanding this correctly.
no, so say you can get, on Rod's example, you can get 10 lots on 30 acres,
Yeah,
right?
right.
If you instead make it 10 lots on 15 acres, you're going to get 1 additional lot, so it would be
You can get 11 on
lots
15 acres.
That's not to be sneezed at.
Oh, so
No.
if you're saying you're going to preserve that space, it still remains that it counts towards.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Right.
you can get a lot for trails and,
Yeah, I mean,
Well, the other
if you're going to
things-
if you're going to conserve 50%, why wouldn't you put a trail in?
and why
Well,
wouldn't you put a vegetated buffer
This is a
around?
fundamental misunderstanding on my part. I thought that by giving up 50%, you'd give up your ability to calculate
Oh, no,
units
No.
based on the developable.
No.
So
No,
if
never
this
mind.
is 30, right now you'd get 10 lots, right?
No, I totally get it now.
Yeah, all right.
But I think maybe we should make it clear somehow with a footnote or something like that, that you're still calculating from the original developable area for number of lots.
So is there a minimum lot size then?
No.
Yes,
20,000?
Well, yeah.
20,000 square feet.
Oh,
Well, this is it.
Which
the
is-
lot size.
20,000 square feet is the minimum lot size.
It's less than a half.
So-
We can revisit that.
And in rural, that's, in sort of market terms, that's pretty small.
Yeah, I mean, our residential areas around this area, the minimum lot size is 6,000 square feet, I want to say. Yeah.
And if you have a lot, let's say the entire lot has more than a 25% slope. Can't build a retaining wall. I mean, that's,
If the entire lot got slopes over 25%?
I mean,
No.
any part of so 20, if more than, just so I can wrap my head around this, slopes over 25% for 5,000 square feet or greater.
Mhm.
So even if a portion of the lot, let's say the portion of the lot that was closest to the utilities was the sloping part, and so it ended up being cheaper to build a retaining wall of some sort, so that you could, so it wasn't so the impact would be a little bit.
That moves towards the design,
Yeah.
which I think then becomes a very, we can walk through that process. I think ideally you would not be developing on steep slopes, but I think if a developer can show that by, somehow developing on that steep slope, they're then preserving or,
Engineering measures.
yeah, I mean, well, first of all, they'd have to prove that they could do the erosion and sedimentation control, but also if it had benefits for other parts of the site, like maybe an ag field, got an easement on it,
Right.
and I think
And that's a DRB decision.
would be a DRB.
Mhm.
Right. So what we had this discussion in the office today, and we've been having it on and off. What we tried to do is be a little more sensitive to how much the lot would be, 25% or steeper, and so that's where the 5,000 square feet comes in. But if the developer makes the argument that by locating, two house sites on that incorporate a steep slope, and by doing that, it minimizes impact on some other aspect of the parcel that is fragile or sensitive or whatever, then that would be, I think, viewed favorably. But if they're just like...
Because you can go to the top. You're going to put a driveway, you're going to get all the way to the top because it's got the nice views.
That's,
I would not view that favorably.
Right.
The board might.
Right. And from a market standpoint, that often, from a marketing standpoint, that's often an attribute that developers want to exploit, but we'd be saying that there'd be other constraints as a consequence of that.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that doesn't... Right.
I know I've asked this question before, but the tree cutting down thing.
That's
where-
out.
Yeah. There's a place somewhere in town, that beautiful house on a hill, and they just clear cut all the trees in front of it. It's on a huge slope.
Yep.
Over Clark
Prospect?
on Prospect Street,
No, we don't have to guess.
right on High Street.
It's over here somewhere, right back there.
But you do have a
Beautiful
line
house.
Right in Western
on
Ave.
Oh, I know.
Four?
You can see that from a
Right.
distance.
From a distance, you can see it. It's by the retreat tower.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Is there a rule against that, or for that, or just do whatever you want?
We would probably get at that between the building envelope and then also the steep slope. So it would be those two things coming together.
So if you've got a possible nice view with trees, you can't come down?
You
Yeah,
could
you
cut
can.
we didn't say you can't cut them down, but you're either not going to do very well with your density bonus incentives, or so therefore, so
Those
I
are
don't-
just,
They're going to do it after the fact, though. I mean,
right. Right. Because that's a parcel level
yeah.
strategy, right?
So-
Sorry. 'Cause I was just thinking, if you did do something on a steep slope, probably much more likely to start. You'd have to cut down a huge amount of the trees in order to dig,
Yeah.
fill, whatever.
I was just going to say the construction process itself on a
Yeah.
steep slope.
yes.
It takes that's a pretty big impact. Well, construction process anyway. I mean, it's always because they need to basically build it with vehicles, so it gets to be a pretty big hole in the tree cover or whatever by the time you've constructed a residential home. You're talking a pretty sizable area.
I don't want to cut this off. Are we generally content with the current state of the density incentives?
Did you?
I am.
Yes. Did you have
Liz has a point.
I had a question when we get to 5.7.
Okay.
So,
Let's go with 5.7. Is there any more talk about density incentives?
no,
Or
I thought the density was,
Do we want to go towards Rod's suggestion, though, if it's, greater than 30 acres or whatever the magic number is, the base is 2 lots?
Rod's magic number. She's just like, okay. We could just post a different number every day.
So that it's not aggressive?
you mean it, some sort of bracket?
Just bracket it. So for 30 and under, it'll be 1 additional lot. 30 and above, it's 2.
Makes sense to me. Makes sense to everyone
It
else?
makes allowance for the larger subdivision.
Yeah, encourages them
Yep.
to do it. Okay. So, Liz, you said 5.7?
Yeah, protection of important natural resources, which we've been doing all along in this layout. But then when we get to, and a lot of the things have already been protected, but then there's a new set of good things to be protected. But it's kind of fuzzy as to whether or not you're going, it's kind of, maybe you should kind of, rather than any sort of actual standard. So they're to be avoided, special attention shall be given. Do we want to be more black and white about whether or not if you cut down a tree, you need to replace it with a specific diameter, something like that?
I feel like that's really hard to do.
Well, what
I
you
think it's-
do is you have a survey of the property of all the trees, and then the ones that you cut down, you replace.
You have to pay somebody to do that? Is that part of
People
the...
do that.
Yeah, it's
It's
like
a survey.
It's a, yeah.
Yeah, probably have, hire you to do that.
There's foresters that specialize in doing.
Diameter, breast height
Yeah.
survey of the trees on the
Yeah,
lot.
there's plenty of people around that actually make a living out of developing forest plans for people in current use. So there's plenty of local expertise and there's plenty of understanding about what it takes to do that.
It's just one more plan sheet.
Yeah, but it's an expense that, I don't know, I mean, I feel like we can't, I want to know where important specimen trees are, and I think it's good to know where there's, some contiguous forest.
Are you
in order
asking
to-
people then to identify specimen trees? Or identify?
Yes, but we don't, yes. Well, old growth trees. So
Yeah, well,
let me,
You
it
could
might work by going through the rural subdivision process.
I think you could think about incorporating these protections into the incentives.
we had it like that
Say-
more. We had it more like that before.
Yeah.
And what I think we ended up feeling was that by smushing them together, it was more confusing. But if I'm hearing you right, a concern that we also have, because it's a discussion that we had this morning, was what the extent of the analysis of the original parcel should be. So back on page 1, 5.3b, I guess we've been going backwards and forwards as to how explicit this should be.
You mean all those 12 items?
Yeah, and that's grown some, right?
Yeah, it has.
Yeah.
So let me just talk to the approval process, and then I'll talk just generally about the standards as they're written. So if you're doing a subdivision in the rural or the rural residential, obviously this section applies as well as the general standards. In order to get an idea of what your lot yield is going to be, we require the pre-application conference. Applicant would come in, sit down with us, we'd go through the GIS data and the BioFinder database, and we'd give them all this information, and we say, it looks like you're going to get 10 lots out of this. But you're still going to need to do the survey and all that information. And if you turn up something different, the DRB will make the final decision on the lot yield. And then we want them to design the subdivision sensitively, so they need to do this site analysis. And they can submit a series of maps, they can do one map. It doesn't need to be surveyed, but obviously if a survey's been done and they've got information, that's great. The idea is to get something like this drawing, at a minimum, that gives some context to the property, like what's special about it, what are the physical constraints, and what are the kind of unique aspects of this. From there, this is kind of the whole conservation subdivision process. From there, you would determine where the Where are the areas that could be developed on the site? Where can they not? I think where you get to some of that language where you should preserve these trees or you should do that, in the end it becomes a judgment call. There's some trade-offs maybe that take place. Maybe there is an old tree that needs to come down because then you can preserve the field or a view. And I think as long as a developer can justify and explain what they're doing, I'm less concerned with tying their hands.
I'm more concerned with the language. That this is a recommendation with no clear force. Like maybe you want to say what you just said, that a developer would need to justify the loss of whatever X, Y, and Z thing is, so that the DRB can make that judgment. Because here it's just thrown out as a recommended good.
In 5.7?
Yeah. Without any test to be given, or I don't know how people would make this decision.
Right. So if you're talking about, if you're an applicant and you're talking about how you're going to mitigate against adverse impact or adverse effect, right? So the first thing you've got to do is establish what resources and what attributes are at risk from your development at all, right? So that's step one, and that's covered to some extent in 5.3b, site analysis and subdivision design. And then you get here, and then the developer needs to show cause as to why they're choosing to cut down these trees rather than do something else.
Yeah, but they're not actually being asked to show cause. They're just being told that would be nice if they did that.
Right. And
if I were the developer, I'd say, "You're not making me,"
right. So
and move along.
Right.
So there has to be a process by which that's brought to a head.
So there needs to be an explanation or an accounting of the kind of individual steps that they're proposing with reference to a set of criteria or something. Mm-hmm. Do we have the criteria?
Well, can I make a suggestion here?
Yeah.
This seems redundant with our setting forth the undevelopable area.
No, you have to keep them separate.
Why?
Because taking out the undevelopable area is simply for the purposes of calculating the lot yield.
Yep.
So right now, we're using the minimum lot size of the zoning district, but we've decided we don't want to use that because we want to go this other route. So setting aside that undevelopable area is only for the purposes of figuring out the lot yield.
Right.
So you should not look at Section 5.4 is kind of a standalone, here's how we're going to figure out what your density is.
Yeah, and all it's really saying is land that's not able to be developed because it has either cultural or natural resource attributes,
Physical constraints.
or physical constraints, won't negatively impact the lot yield. When we get to discussing what you're going to do about this area of land that's got physical constraints or natural and cultural attributes that we want to protect, then it's a different conversation, and that's where we are right now.
Can we just say that you can't develop in areas that limit the lot yield? In the identified areas that limit the lot yield?
But those are only physical constraints. They're not kind of what's unique about the property.
Right. So we want
We could say that,
right.
But if we want to preserve rural character, then it's not just steep slopes that define our rural
So this is
character.
an entirely different analysis, but I just think that the part that's missing is how is this conversation going to occur? How is it going to be looked at and judged. And here, we only have the part that talks about what the recommended good is. And there isn't a part that talks about how the process is going to work. Someone's going to have a drawing, and the DRB is going to look at it. Otherwise, how would you know?
So is that more of a process?
Well,
I mean, I think, the standards are written more of they're more performance-based than
well,
do
this
this,
is
do that.
yeah. This one is particularly lukewarm. So I'm just saying, how are we going to achieve this goal that's been set here? How is that going to happen? Because if nobody's making anybody do anything,
Nothing's going to happen.
nothing's going to happen. But if short of that, if you want to have a conversation about, well, I did it this way because I wanted to preserve X, so I'm going to lose Y.
Right.
Because this is my site, and of course every site is unique. So there has to be that process, and I don't see it being set up here. I see somebody looking at that and saying, "Hey, you're not going to make me forget about it," and that's that.
Okay.
I know my New Jersey's coming out here, but forget about it. So there
I think it's, forget about it.
Okay.
There has to be a process so that it's not forgotten.
I agree with that. However, I don't know. Part of me thinks that that's the DRB's work. And
Yeah, but we're giving...
these are the standards, so they should be making findings
Yeah.
on these points. And so, in my mind, they need to make a finding that important natural resources
Okay,
are
well,
protected.
if that's what you want, then let's say that here, that the DRB must make a finding relative to review of these items, so that we're giving the DRB the rules that they need so that they can do the work to advance the goals that we want them to advance.
Good job, Liz.
There you go.
Just before we go there,
Ah, shucks.
that's one strategy, which is to say that the DRB has to make affirmative findings. That's fine. But if I was putting on the DRB person's hat, I'd say, how do you want me to make affirmative findings if you don't provide me criteria? Like, what am I measuring this against, basically? And so I just can't take the word of the developer that, well, gee shucks, I really tried to save that tree, but I guess it fell down, or something like that. It's not, there's nothing kind of mechanical enough in the process and I'm thinking, I've been spending way too much time with the Public Service Board process, as you know, and I'm not holding it up as an ideal process by any means. But if you think about what you're being asked to do, tests of like the Koichi test, adverse unknown. But just take it as an example. There's all this case law around, and there's this stuff built up where the land use practice in the state has very clear criteria around aesthetic impact or whatever it is that you measure it by. And I'm not recommending.
I don't think it's very clear, but.
No, otherwise there would be so many well-off lawyers. But sorry, James. But the idea that I'm trying to get at here is that unless we lay out steps for the developer to follow that requires them to say, I'm mitigating against this impact by doing this, or I am making a judgment here that the value of this asset, old barn, is worth at least as much as this asset,
Specimen tree.
Specimen tree, right? So I'm going for preserving the barn as a cultural, part of the cultural heritage of the neighborhood, and to do that, I'm willing to sacrifice the life of this tree, of which there are 10 within half a mile that are almost as nice as this one, and actually say it like that, right? Because that's what you'd do. You'd say it's a part of a plant community, of which there are, nine other robust examples on the hillside. So, bingo, But at least you're drawn out to have to say, I value this barn the most, and so my plan reflects that I'm putting my money and my effort here, not here.
But I don't know how we draw them out in regulations. Again, I think that's the DRB. They need to draw
I know
it out.
it's-
And I think part of that is doing this site analysis so that when you're before the DRB, you can say, yep, I'm cutting down this grove of trees here, this mature trees, but, I'm not crossing the stream or I'm not developing
Well-
on this steep slope. And I think that there has to be more than one way to design a subdivision. So
There
I think
is.
being
If I had to do this, if I had to prove this, I would have to have some sort of a plan, and maybe it's that plan, and then some sort of a statement of purpose or
Right.
something that says why I designed this the way I designed it in light of these natural resources. So you could call it a natural resource statement.
As a member of the DRB, just
No,
reading
the
something like that-
applicant.
No, I know,
Yeah.
but as a member of the DRB,
Yeah.
I think that would sort of give them a good idea of what the project is all about and how
I
much
think that's
effort
what
they're
they do with
putting
Act
towards-
250, isn't
Yeah.
it? They have to
Well,
write
and
a
I'm
statement.
talking
Yeah.
about like a page, but just that it could be as little as a page, but saying, these are the resources on the site, and, my engineer and I chose to do this to preserve this,
Right.
and unfortunately, that means we're going to lose this, but on the whole, I think this is the best site plan for this property in question.
But they don't even
And you're
have-
wanting a
they don't
way
have-
that says that the developer will do that. And you're saying it doesn't exist here.
It's just
Yes.
Yeah, it's just not.
It's just not
Not clear.
written in here to
Yes,
do that.
to do that.
Elizabeth,
The only
we've
thing
talked
that's
about
here
that.
is the goal that's stated.
We've talked about that with site plan, actually, because a lot of times the site plan will come across my desk and I can't even tell what's going on. And then occasionally you get an application where the applicant has written a letter and it's like,
Yeah,
oh,
okay, that's
this
good.
is his intent. This is great.
All
I
right,
get it.
now I get it. Right.
So yeah, I get that. I mean, I think that could be helpful. I think I generally thought that more in terms of application requirements, materials, like
right.
our own forms.
Yeah.
But
Well,
there's nothing wrong with.
Yeah. I don't think this is too much to ask. I mean, it's really just, it's like what the engineer would say if he testified. But it's just putting it out to address this element in a way that people can make a judgment.
They don't even have to have a survey, do they?
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, they do.
Where does it say?
It's
Back-
in the Article 2.
Right.
No.
So what do we settle on? I mean, is show cause too strong?
I think I'd probably look at.
Provide
how
an
Act 250
analysis.
What did you call it?
Natural resource statement.
Okay. Yeah, I think
And I
we
read
should.
that and I go, what the heck is that?
Well, I mean, we
So
can.
it's good. Well, it can be
I
like
just
that
want-
analyzes the resources and defends the.
Yeah. I mean, it's just that I just thought that this paragraph needed another paragraph to say
Right.
what you're going to do.
We actually had a parallel conversation, which was if it's 10, if the project is 10 acres of development or more, or 10 units or more, they have to get an Act 250 permit anyway. So while we're not compelled to match the Act 250 process or whatever, there's a way in which if our terminology and our expectations are as consistent with Act 250 expectations as possible in this regard, that might be beneficial.
Oh, no, that's a great idea.
Yeah. So we should maybe check in on Act 250. I mean, what I'd say there, holding my breath a little bit, is we might not find the Act 250 thing that satisfying. Just saying. In which case we might still be, prompted to do our own. But
Yeah. Well, if we want to preserve these goals,
Yeah.
we just have to have a mechanism by which that's done.
Yeah.
What are the setbacks in these areas?
Maybe 25 feet. They might have to be
Adjusted.
They might have to be adjusted given that we're reducing the minimum lot size.
I think they're 25
I think they're 25 on the
side and 50. No, I don't think so.
So if your minimum lot size is 21,000 square feet?
Yeah, it's
20.
got to change.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the other thing that we should say here.
Oh,
Yeah, go on.
well, just the other two things are the same and probably should be incorporated, open space and energy. If you want people to do something, they'll have to that they should say how they are or are not meeting it.
Wouldn't that result, at least with 5.9, in someone having to either build solar or wind
No.
energy, or having to say why they didn't?
Well, they could say it's not feasible because the first words are "where feasible."
You want to leave that in, though.
Yeah. You have to, I think in some ways, for process reasons, you have to allow them to say not applicable or.
It's not feasible
Or not
because
feasible.
it would.
And it might just be citing the house in a certain direction. It might not have anything to do with putting in solar or specific
Right, I thought,
technology. It might just be building a passive solar house that, or
Right.
just having the vegetation be on the north side of the house and the more southerly side,
If you made it a condition of the subdivision that everyone builds an earth-sheltered house, then you'd knock it out of the park.
right.
And
I
you
thought
wouldn't have to
Liz
do anything
wanted to
else.
get rid of stuff like where feasible.
Oh, okay.
But I
Well,
think the problem is,
I am in that direction, but I think if we have people just make a statement of how they're addressing it,
Okay.
rather than what I don't like is the fact that all we have now is this statement saying that it would be nice if a developer did this,
Yeah.
and no recourse to have them
You want-
address it.
You want should to be must.
shall to be
I don't
should.
even
Should to be shall.
care about that. I just want that there must be some sort of a statement accounting for
Okay.
themselves as to how they thought about and addressed
Right.
these passages.
Right.
yeah.
Yeah,
So-
even if they say that, it doesn't mean they're going to follow through.
Oh, no, that's a different issue, because what they say and what you, on the
Allow them to
DRB,
do.
allow them to do in your approval, they must do, and we've talked about that before, that the zoning officer would make them do what is part of their approval,
Yeah.
what is everything in their approval.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It seems like when stuff comes before the DRB, it's not always black and white. There's some things that you just don't point to. And it's like, oh, well, here's this beautiful, look at all this green space, and look at all this, but
Well, the
You know what I
DRB,
mean? It's
yes,
like-
so someone's going to have this discussion now. The DRB is going to have this discussion
Yeah.
if we approve this with every developer. And so,
if the DRB doesn't, I guess I'm saying that if the DRB doesn't ask the right questions and stuff never comes up.
well, that's why
Well,
we're giving,
Well,
yeah,
that's, I mean, that's,
we're giving guidance to the DRB.
That's where I was going with the criteria
Yeah.
thing. It's
Yeah.
like, if we really want to put them in the box and say, you got to go through these criteria and find affirmatively against these criteria, it's one way of requiring the DRB to ask the question and get the response. Now, the adequacy of the answer is still something the DRB can go, well, good try, that's all right, next. Or say, ooh, that wasn't a very good answer.
Yeah, well, maybe that should be sort of a goal, is how do you get the DRB to get to ask the questions that way? They can't lie if you're saying it, and
Right.
there's a difference between lying and not saying it.
yeah,
So,
Right, which is-
not being asked the question and not
Which
being
is
pushed on it.
Right, it's one of those weird processes where it is effective to the extent that the DRB frames the question and requires an answer on the part of the applicant.
I think
where
that's
it's
called
not
being Jesuitical.
Actually, I have somebody who's becoming an expert in that regard.
Well, I already am an expert on
That's
that.
good. Maybe you can share with him.
Yes.
He needs some backup training.
Yeah.
Hey, what's up?
Purple Dodge Neon in the parking lot.
Purple what neon?
Dodge.
Neon.
Is it? No. Sorry.
Over for the library.
Maybe the library.
Are they still over there?
They
It's-
may
yeah,
still be
sure,
open.
they're
yet.
open
Is
till
there a
9
problem
o'clock.
with it? Apart
Oh,
from
the
the.
lights are on. They just didn't want the renovated.
Oh, thank
Oh,
you.
that's
Thank
sweet.
you.
Okay. Yeah.
Not us.
They're probably helping us catch this fire. Okay.
We should think more about how we want to
What
work.
a frame this.
I mean, I like your suggestion of a statement, because then, I mean, I think that, if these get adopted, obviously we need staff needs to work with the DOB to help them understand them and
Right.
what we think their role is.
I mean, we can put in guidelines as to what that statement should and should not
Should-
include.
Right. What I was going to say was, for the most part, we'd be expecting PRD or PUD processes also for things much above. I mean, I think our sort of default expectation here, which involves a whole other set of documentation, I guess.
I almost
Right.
see these rural subdivisions almost operating like a PUD
Yeah,
or a
right.
PRD, and when the DRB is operating with that, there is, kind of goes
Hand in
back and
hand.
forth. It's
Right.
not, I think right now, the subdivision process hasn't really enabled that kind of, or hasn't fostered that kind of
Right.
back and forth.
And in times past, when there have been PUD or PRD applications here, there has been some effort on the applicant to basically have some form of narrative or some
Yeah.
statement of purpose or something, because
Yeah.
that ends up being part of the documentation. And so, I'm not advertising the benefits of the process, but because it involves just about everybody, including the select board, there's plenty of questioning and scrutiny given to how well the final plan implements the kind of the, if you like, the intentions or the initial goals of the project.
Yep.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Anything else in there? Any reason we can't move on to subdivision standards split?
Dichotomy.
You promised.
I already used.
Alright. So, at the last meeting, you had asked me to kind of look at the standards and be able to justify them with the town plan. So I started going through this ridiculous exercise and thought, I'm not going to do them for a month, so why don't I just stop this and figure it out and then tell you what I've done. So,
Okay.
well, a lot of the standards, if you got the old draft, a lot of the standards were not justified by the town plan. They were like really specific, like don't put your house in the field and don't do this and don't do that. So that's where I started moving towards the performance standards. And then it felt to me like the standards were definitely written to address the rural subdivisions. Because that's what we were really trying to improve on. Mm-hmm. But yet the issues and the needs for kind of the in-town subdivisions, residential districts, the rural commercial, urban center, are really different.
Yeah.
There we're more concerned about having walkable communities, kind of maintaining the pattern of development, having interconnected streets. We're interested in that elsewhere too. But we want an interconnected street network. We do want the walkable and multi-users to be addressed. More concerned about having uniformity in a sense. Lots, lot shape being much more regular and uniform. So we had that discussion, and then Rod came up with a suggestion, well, maybe we should have two sets of standards. So now we have the general standards, which apply across the board, and they're really the ones that, that's the roads, that's the utilities. If you're creating open space, how is it going to be managed? And what else is in there? So, stormwater and erosion control applies, whatever development you're doing, water and wastewater. But then you've got the in-town subdivision standards and the rural subdivision standards.
Can I ask a quick question before we start on this? Is it even possible for the large tracts of undeveloped land that is in town that's owned mainly by the retreat to ever be developed? Like if they decided they wanted to sell that off, even though right now it's in conservation easement?
I don't know how their easements are set up.
That's a technical legal question. If it's there in perpetuity,
I'm not a lawyer.
then it's pretty hard to do. But it might be not in perpetuity. It might
Which
be,
of these would apply if that happened to large tracts?
Well, I'm not sure the zoning district that they're in, but the town plan recommends that they be in the rural zoning district.
Yep.
Oh,
So
okay.
then the rural subdivision.
Yeah.
Okay,
I
sorry
don't
to
know what
interrupt
they're in
you.
right now.
the,
That's a weird question.
a combination of rural, residential, and rural.
The PUD.
And then there's the PUD, well, there's three, and then the PUD. The PUD then would be dissolved, or the boundaries of the PUD would be amended, and then it will go back to the underlying zoning, which would probably be
Okay.
rural or residential.
Yeah, sorry, please.
That's all right.
Good question.
However, there's lots of smaller parcels. That's the obvious big one when you're sort of looking at the Google mapping and going, yeah, that's a
Right.
lot. But there are a large number of other sites, that could plausibly be subdivided, smaller than that, though. Yeah, Putney Road comes to mind.
Right.
The edge, yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
So is
What about
Putney
the
Road
one I
in town or
mentioned to
in
you
town?
in the office?
Well, we were having a debate in the office about
It's a PUD right now?
in town versus whether we should call it in town or neighborhood subdivisions.
And it's rural residential.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So
Oh, yeah, so,
Oh, neighborhood.
yeah, we thought, in town, we went with, for the purposes of getting this out, but we thought maybe neighborhood.
okay, apparently neighborhood. I don't know.
I think that's a good idea.
I mean, it comports with the part of the town plan that hopes to
Have neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be good.
So we could call
You
it
would call it
neighborhood
Mr. Rogers subdivisions? Is that what you're going
Yes,
for?
yes.
So I mean, first of all, does anybody
Compact.
think that this is a bad direction to go in?
No.
Does everybody think it's a pretty good direction?
Yes.
Seems to make sense,
It's
at
figured.
least it,
I mean, it makes sense to me.
We were going around and around and around trying to keep things straight, and it seemed to us, for all practical intents and purposes, that whichever way you were coming at, if you were somebody that was proposing a smaller subdivision, in the neighborhood in town, you wouldn't want to wade through all the other stuff to try and find out what you're supposed to be doing or not, and vice versa. That if you're out there in a rural district, you don't really want to answer all these questions about neighborhoods.
neighborhoods.
That's why you
I think
move
it's
out
great.
to the rural district, right?
Some of us have taken radical steps and have moved several towns away, but yeah, that's right.
Well, do you want to discuss the in-town stuff? Is that the goal here? Or?
Yeah, so lot yield is going to be straight up as it is now. You're just going to use the minimum lot size in the zoning district. Density bonuses didn't really feel were necessary because when you start looking at the permitted uses in residential, you can get lots of units on one lot. So that doesn't necessarily. We're not trying to necessarily achieve much. They're pretty constrained lot as it is.
So within this is an old question of mine, but somebody could still create a little pocket neighborhood on an acre and a half land, say, for instance?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
This all seems very simple, almost
I know.
too
it
simple.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like,
Well, that's the other
That's
inducement.
great.
yeah.
That's the other inducement. If you want to do a subdivision, you should do it here.
That leads to the density that we want to
Yeah,
create.
that's
That's
right.
right.
Right. I mean, actually, in serious terms, that's not a bad way of looking at it.
Yeah.
They were basically saying if you want to do a greenfield development in rural or rural residential areas, you're going to have to, get your game on. Whereas,
Because
Yeah, because we're going to be asking them serious questions, whereas this one's like, it's pretty
It's a little
straightforward.
perfunctory.
Yeah.
Block size and arrangement, so if you're creating new blocks, we want it to kind of be similar. So if you think of the neighborhoods near the high school or something like that, Clark Ave, some of those streets up there, South Main, it's pretty Washington Street. You kind of know what you're getting into, so if there's going to be any extension of those, we'd want to perpetuate that. Same block size and arrangement and streets. Lot size and arrangement, again, much more uniform. We had a recent subdivision lot line adjustment up there, and there's no reason that you can't kind of keep the same lot shapes that are going on up there, even if you're just doing a lot line adjustment. Flag lots, and through lots, we really shouldn't be creating them, but we'll allow them if there's no other alternative. So, say you've got a big parcel and you want to subdivide and put an infill lot, you can do it. You're going to need the 20-foot, but that's basically saying you don't have access another way. So you're going to.
There are a lot of. There is a lot of land that needs that in town, right?
Needs that?
Well, from what I understand, there's a lot of development along the road frontage with undeveloped land in the interior.
In the
Where?
in the in-town area.
Maybe not in town, but
And I could see it on Putney Road, maybe.
Yeah.
there's just like a lot of land behind that first development along the road. That
That could be true in parts of Putney Road and maybe Route 30-ish.
I was thinking Western Ave,
Yeah,
but
no.
Western Ave gets pretty constrained with the floodplain.
Oh, you mean that far out? Yeah, I don't see that as an issue.
South Street, you go up there and everything's on the road.
yeah, that's what I'm talking
That's
about.
the rural and rural
Yeah.
residential.
Is that
yeah.
rural?
They're
already?
relatively long, narrow parcels.
Yeah, it's
you're
rural
right.
residential, I
Yeah.
think.
Okay.
So,
Right.
yeah.
And yeah, it's probably just best to leave it the way it is, I think.
Yeah.
It's
That's what Denny spoke about.
right.
A lot of that development is there.
Yeah.
Street connectivity, so we just want to keep the interconnected streets and extend it where it can be extended. Same with sidewalks. So perhaps we can talk about requiring sidewalks in these areas.
Yeah, this links back to that conversation we're having right back at the beginning of the meeting.
Because this is not requiring it, it's basically saying you shall maintain it and extend it.
Yeah,
But it's
yeah, it's not very specific.
Shall is the you shall do it. You must do it.
Oh,
Well, we could always give them the shall and then say, if you want to say why you shouldn't have to, because it's in a weird place or something, you can go to the DRB.
Yeah.
Well, this still has to go to the DOB. but-
Yeah.
Right.
And maybe I'm dumb or something, but do we have all these zoning districts? This looks like a ton of zoning districts.
Yeah.
Are we
all
one of
within
our-
working
the,
on that?
One of our future
cleaning those
Yeah,
up?
that's our
Just,
future
um,
project. That's
Okay,
the next
'cause-
project.
yeah.
Yep.
You remember all those meetings we had where we talked about that?
Remember the 9 zoning districts?
I kind of thought they were
Oh,
already
God.
done.
I remember fighting
a
that
lot.
at one point.
We,
Oh,
we,
God, yeah.
we think the easiest way to do it
Yeah.
is just to sort of randomly
Remember, I
delete.
didn't like the Park Place getting changed.
Oh, yes.
I thought there'd be too much traffic. That was stupid.
Oh,
Anyway,
really? Now you changed your mind on that?
I think so.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
I can change.
you're getting older and more mature, huh?
Ooh.
Anyway, okay.
Rock on, James. There's-
Conversation for another day.
Yeah, evolution. I'm liking it.
Oh, you should. You're becoming one of us.
This seems so simple. It's almost like if we'd be talking about it, we'd just be talking for the sake of talking. Am I wrong that everybody
I don't
thinks
have
this is
anything more
pretty
to say.
sweet?
I think it does go to Liz's suggestion of requiring a statement, because I can see how landscaping,
Yeah.
there's definitely having a statement, I think. How to word that, we need to work on that.
Right.
Do you want to mess around with bonding on the landscaping here? Or is this not the
Or is
place?
that a
Not
site
place.
plan
Okay.
item?
No, shut up, James. Okay.
Yep.
Well, that's good. Sorry.
Okay.
So I think we can move on. I mean, I'm thrilled that this came out so simply and everybody likes it. So good job.
It took us a while to get there. It was really weird.
Did.
It's really hard to be simple.
Yeah, it is.
It is, actually.
It's stressful.
I have a hard time
It's
keeping
demanding.
things simple.
Okay.
It's hard to be simple and achieve complex goals.
Oh,
Ooh,
yes.
that's genius.
That sounds
apparently.
like a
That's the
dichotomy there as well.
That's the definition of genius I came across the other day.
I have to say that I think, so the next month for me is just kind of finalizing it, getting it all tweaked,
Yeah, you should get this thing
correct
ready
way.
to go.
and then, getting it ready to go. I think I need to give a little bit more thought. I think that these make sense to some extent for our PUD standards. Right now, I have to go back and revisit
Right.
that because the zoning, I just need to think about PUDs. A lot of times PUDs are treated as subdivisions. The standards are the same. So I think that might make sense.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. I mean, it would be great if we
Make that
could
easier, too.
get this thing kicked up to the decision makers. Do you want to do state permit activity of interest?
Sure. So this is just a minor inclusion on the agenda. We now have a degree of interest on the part of the select board in what's going on in state permitting jurisdictions with regard to Brattleboro. So what I thought I'd just do is cut and paste a table that I use to report to the select board on a monthly basis in here. And the two items so that people here have an awareness of what's coming before either the Public Service Board or the Act 250.
But we don't
District Environmental
review it
Commission.
as a body, the select board does.
Right, and in fact, James, as the chair of the Planning Commission, gets emails and so forth, and so we are parties to be notified. And if we want to take an extra step, when I say we, I should be more specific. If the town wants to take an extra step, it has to make a conscious decision to do that.
But the planning commission has no authority in any of this.
No.
Is this first one the one that we did
Yes.
review already?
Yes. Yes.
Along the highway.
Yes.
And we asked that it be expedited, but nobody else in town did.
Well,
We
no,
signed off on it.
I think the
Yeah.
select board
We
said
signed-
no.
Yeah, they did.
Yes,
in fact,
right.
said,
yeah, we
right.
said yes, but yeah.
It's been quite the ongoing
I know.
thing at the select board. So I've been before the select board twice on this item.
Really?
Yeah. And
Seems so simple.
Got to preserve that interstate
Oh, it's been,
green
the issues
side
wouldn't believe.
area.
Is this about the interstate stuff,
Yes.
or is this
Yeah.
still Solar Hill?
This,
No.
the interstate.
interstate.
I mean, you drive down the interstate, you see them all over, they're starting to be all over the place now.
Right. So anyway, but that being said, that it's required 2 visits to the select board.
Let's hope no one watches this.
Sorry, everybody.
It's been going well in that the disposition of the select board is, the majority of the select board is, I think, is supportive of the project going forward. You could say some people on the select board have got some concerns about the aesthetic impact, and yet other people on the select board have got concerns with the process. So the applicant had the choice of seeking an expedited process all the way through. So not only did they want us to sign off on something saying, just go for it, but the Public Service Board itself can also, what they call, expedite the application, and the Public Service Board could opt to not hold a hearing, which, given the size of the project, that's a pretty, what's the word I'm looking for? Pretty sizable. The impact of that decision is not insignificant, and so the applicant, in the form of Downs Reckland Martin, Peter Van Oot, requested an expedited process. The Public Service Board somewhat surprisingly granted it, and in the intervening Because they've never done a project that large before. I mean, this is like literally 4 times bigger than the last project that they insisted on holding a hearing for. So everyone was somewhat taken aback that the Public Service Board thought that there wasn't any need for a hearing. And then somewhat undermining the whole thing, there's been this back and forth between the board itself and the applicants in the form of memos demonstrating the possible need to hold a hearing to establish testimony as to the impact. And then the Agency of Natural Resources, I believe, and the Public Service Department have both sought to appear before the Public Service Board. So I think in the end there will be a hearing. Anyway, so that's that one. And then the second one is simply an application on the behalf of the lumberyard in the north end of town, which actually straddles both Dummerston and Brattleboro. And it was an amendment to an existing Act 250 permit. And the District Environmental Commission has asked for more information in the application before they even schedule a hearing, I believe.
What is the District Environmental Commission?
That's the body that there are district environmental commissions. They're not modelled on regions. So in other words, they don't have the same configuration exactly as a county or a region. So they have their own map. And it is the regional body made up of 3 appointed board members, assisted by a full-time staff person, and they hear Act 250 applications, amendments and applications within their territory, which is not the same as anybody else's territory as far as I can figure out.
And what do they call this territory that we're in?
The
District 3?
Yeah.
Environmental Commission.
Or
That's poetic.
Or April's territory.
It's a little Hunger Games.
Right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. And April Hensel, and she is the district coordinator.
I think that's her position.
Right. Yep. That's right.
Okay.
Yep.
Anything more to say about that?
Not in front of a microphone and a camera, no.
No, I mean the lumberyard.
Oh,
It's going before the DRB
going for-
Monday
yeah,
night
right.
for site plan amendment.
Before or after the sheep?
I don't think you'd be able to tell the
After,
difference.
I believe.
After. Good.
Huge.
Well, the sheep are still on the agenda again?
I'll be checking out the whole meeting.
Yeah.
Forgot.
From afar or up
My
close?
usual post.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I think you're on after. This is on after the sheep.
Okay.
It's all natural resources, though, James. Just
Do we have any other business?
I move we adjourn.
I'll second that.
Just